My girlfriend and I had been planning a quiet getaway for a while. Work had been exhausting for both of us, and we wanted somewhere peaceful. No crowds, no screens, just trees and silence. We picked a rustic cabin in eastern Tennessee, way out past the small towns and gas stations, near the edge of a national forest. It looked perfect in the pictures. Wood-paneled, a stone fireplace, an old clawfoot tub, and just enough of that worn-out charm that made it feel real. There was no Wi-Fi, no cell service, and the nearest neighbors were a few miles down the road. That was part of the appeal. We wanted to disconnect from everything. We arrived just before sunset. The drive had been long, about 8 hours, and winding through those narrow roads in the hills had been nerve-wracking. But the cabin looked exactly like it did online. Maybe a little smaller in person, a little more beat up than I expected, but still cozy. It had a strange smell inside, like dry wood, dust, and old fabric, but that wasn't unusual for places like this. The cold was creeping in already. It was late fall and the nights had started dipping below freezing. I got the fireplace going while she unpacked. It took some effort, but once it caught, the warmth spread fast. We had dinner by candlelight, canned soup, crackers, and a bottle of wine. Afterward, we sat by the fire for a while, then went to bed early. The bedroom was small, with just enough space for the bed, a dresser, and a small vent on the wall up near the ceiling. I remember noticing that vent right away. It was thin and old, made of metal, with a circular grate screwed in place. There were identical vents in the living room and the bathroom. They weren't connected to any HVAC system. The cabin didn't have central heating. I figured it was some old passive ventilation system meant to circulate air between rooms. Harmless. The first night was quiet. We were both exhausted from the drive and passed out as soon as our heads hit the pillows. The second night, though, something changed. Around 11 p.m., just after we'd gotten into bed, I started hearing something, faint, almost like a breeze blowing through the vent. First, I thought it was the wind outside. It had picked up a bit after sunset, and the trees outside were swaying hard enough to creak. But then I noticed it wasn't a whooshing sound, it was more rhythmic, soft, like whispers. I sat up and listened. It was coming from the vent above the bed. I looked at her. She was reading a paperback, headphones in. I didn't want to freak her out, so I just laid back down, telling myself it was the wind echoing through the ductwork. Old metal carries sound in weird ways. We fell asleep eventually, though I kept one ear open longer than I usually would. The whispering had stopped at some point. Maybe I'd imagined it. The third night was colder. We had to keep the fire going longer just to stay warm. We played cards after dinner, then got into bed around 10:30. That night, the sounds started again. But they weren't just whispers this time. They were words, clear ones. "You should kill them tonight." I froze. It was a man's voice, calm, slow, like he was stating a fact. Not yelling, not excited, just saying it. I looked at her. She'd heard it too. Her eyes were wide, staring straight at the vent. She didn't say anything, and neither did I. We just stayed perfectly still. Then another sentence came, softer but still clear. "She's sleeping. He's awake." Felt like my blood turned cold. The voice wasn't muffled like it would be if someone were outside. It was close, inside the walls or the vent system. That was when I really looked at the layout of the cabin in my head. The vent didn't go outside. It only connected the living room, bedroom, and bathroom. No way that voice was from the woods. This was coming from somewhere inside. I got up quietly, tiptoed to the kitchen, grabbed a roll of duct tape I'd seen in a drawer, and started sealing the vent in the bedroom. She followed without saying anything. We moved from room to room, taping each vent shut. Every metal circle, every gap. I could still hear faint noises while I did it. Not words anymore, just movement, shuffling, like someone adjusting their weight, crawling or shifting in a tight space. We didn't sleep at all that night. We sat up with the fire burning low, listening. Every now and then, I thought I heard the boards creak in the hallway, but I couldn't be sure. I didn't check. I didn't want to know. As soon as the sun came up, we packed everything, threw it into the back of the car, and left. No coffee, No breakfast. We just got the hell out. About an hour into the drive, once we had a signal again, I messaged the cabin owner. I didn't want to accuse him of anything, so I just said we'd heard strange noises in the vents and thought he should know. He replied later that day, sounding weirdly casual at first. Said thanks for the heads up, probably just animals in the walls, happens sometimes out there. But a few hours later, he sent another message. This time, a lot more serious. He told me that about a year earlier, someone had broken into the cabin through the basement. It had been during the off-season, when no one was renting. When the cleaner showed up weeks later, they found signs someone had been living there. Food wrappers, a sleeping bag tucked behind a false panel in the wall. They assumed it was a squatter, maybe a drifter or someone living off-grid. He said they repaired everything, sealed the basement up tight, replaced locks. They thought it was handled. That's all he said. We thought it was fixed. The basement door had been padlocked from the outside when we arrived. I remember because I tried to open it, thinking it might be storage for firewood or tools. But now I keep wondering, was it really locked the whole time? Or was someone already inside when we got there? I haven't been able to stop thinking about that voice. The calmness of it. The way it knew who was awake, who was asleep. It wasn't the kind of thing you hear from someone just trying to scare you. Felt like we were being watched. Closely. For hours, maybe days. Someone knew our movements, our routines, what time we went to bed, which one of us stayed up longer. That means they were there the whole time, listening, maybe even watching us through the vents. We never saw anyone, never heard footsteps or doors, but I think whoever it was knew the place better than we did. They knew how to move without being heard, how to stay just out of reach. We didn't find any signs, no footprints, no belongings, nothing left behind. But maybe that's because they never left. We didn't call the police. There was nothing to report, technically. Just voices, and fear, and the possibility, no, the certainty that someone else had been there. We'll never go back. I check every vent now, everywhere we stay. Hotels, guest rooms, airbnbs. I can't help it. I have to know what's behind the walls. Because I don't think that voice was just trying to scare us. I think it was deciding something. And maybe we got out just in time. I needed a break from everything. Work had been draining me, and I felt like I was one bad day away from snapping. So I booked a remote cabin deep in Oregon, about a 3-hour drive from the nearest town. It was cheap, no frills, and completely off-grid. That was part of the appeal. No Wi-Fi, no cell towers, no one to bother me, just me, a few books, and the sound of wind through trees. I arrived around late afternoon. The sun was already low, casting long shadows through the dense pines. The dirt road that led to the cabin was narrow and winding, barely wide enough for one vehicle. The cabin itself was small, built from old timber, with a rusted tin roof and a single front porch light that didn't work. There was a small generator out back, but I only planned to use it if absolutely necessary. Inside, the place was basic. One bed, a little kitchen, and a bathroom that barely had running water from a rain-fed tank system. No mirrors, no TV, no distractions. Just what I needed. I unpacked some food, cans mostly, and set up my sleeping bag on top of the cabin's mattress. I didn't want to touch more than I had to. The place smelled like old wood and dust, but not in a bad way. Just untouched. I put my phone on airplane mode as soon as I got there to save battery. I figured I wouldn't need it anyway. I had downloaded a couple of podcasts and audiobooks, but the idea was to disconnect. The first night was calm. I read until the sun set, then cooked some beans over a tiny portable stove I brought. I sat on the porch for a while afterward, staring out into the woods. It was dead silent. No cars, no people, just the creaking of trees in the wind and the occasional chirp of an insect. I felt good, like I had finally carved out a piece of peace in my life. I went to bed around 11. The generator was off, so it was completely dark inside. I had a lantern next to the bed, but kept it off to preserve fuel. It took a while to fall asleep, but I eventually did, listening to the sound of my own breathing and the wind outside. Then around midnight, I heard the faintest vibration. It was that distinct hum of a phone on a wooden surface. first, I thought I imagined it, but I reached over, fumbled under my pillow, and pulled out my phone. The screen was on. The weird part, it wasn't locked. I always had it on auto lock after 30 seconds. But now it was on, open to the messaging app like someone had just been typing. My heart rate jumped a little. On the screen was a text draft. No contact listed. Just one sentence. "He can't see me if I don't move." I froze. I sat up in bed and stared at the screen for a long time. My first thought was, did I type this in my sleep? Maybe I bumped it somehow. But the sentence was too specific, too intentional, and the phone had been under my pillow. It would have taken more than a random tap to unlock the phone, open the messaging app, and type that. My hands were cold now. I deleted the draft, locked the phone, and tucked it deeper under the pillow. I didn't turn on the lantern. I didn't want light. I just laid back down, wide awake, staring at the ceiling in the dark. The next few hours felt endless. Every tiny creak in the cabin made me tense up. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just a glitch, a weird coincidence. Maybe a pocket touch, even though the phone wasn't in my pocket. I kept replaying the sentence in my head, over and over. "He can't see me if I don't move." At some point, I must have drifted off. I woke again when I felt a buzz under my pillow. I checked the time, 3:07 a.m. I didn't want to look at the phone, but I had to. Pulled it out. The screen was on again. The messaging app was open again. Another draft was there. "He's standing over you right now." I swear I stopped breathing. I didn't move. I just stared at the screen, waiting for the words to go away, or to change, or for anything to make sense. I scanned the room without turning my head. It was too dark to see clearly, but I didn't hear anything. Nothing but my own heart pounding. I reached for the lantern but stopped. Some part of me felt like if I turned on the light, I'd see something I didn't want to. I stayed still for maybe a full minute, gripping the phone like it was a weapon. Then I sat up slowly, turned on the lantern, and looked around. There was nothing there. The room was empty, just my bag, my jacket on a chair, and the shadows of the log walls stretching across the floor. The door was still locked. The windows were shut. Nothing made sense. I took a deep breath, grabbed my backpack, shoved my phone and charger in, and walked out. No shoes, no jacket. I didn't even pack anything else. I just walked straight to the car, barefoot and cold, with the lantern in one hand and my bag in the other. I started the engine and pulled out of that gravel lot like something was chasing me. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I was about 40 miles out and saw a gas station that had lights on. I parked under the fluorescent glow and sat there for a long time, just letting my hands stop shaking. In the morning, when I got somewhere with reception, I checked everything. I looked through my phone's sent messages, drafts, notes, everything. Nothing. The messages were gone. I called Apple support later, hoping they could at least tell me if a draft had been autosaved or backed up. But they said there was no record of any drafts or messages sent or unsent during that time. Nothing had synced to the cloud. It was like it never happened, but it did. I still remember the exact phrasing, the punctuation, the feel of the words hitting me like a punch to the gut. I know what I saw. I didn't imagine it. I threw the phone away 2 days later, got a new one, different number, different account. I never went back to that cabin, never even looked it up again. I don't know if someone was out there messing with me, or if there was some kind of surveillance I didn't notice. I didn't want to know. All I know is that I wasn't alone in that cabin. I thought I was, but I wasn't, and whatever was there, it wanted me to know it. I rented the cabin for a long weekend, just to get out of the city. Work had been draining. My apartment was noisy from construction across the street, and I needed somewhere quiet to breathe for a bit. I found this listing on a site for off-grid getaways, small cabin, up in the Adirondacks, middle of nowhere. No Wi-Fi, no cell service, just a fireplace, a stocked kitchen, a couple of books on the shelf, and a lake about a 10-minute walk away. Sounded perfect. I got there on a Thursday afternoon. The dirt road leading to the cabin was narrow and barely maintained. more like a trail than a road. The last half-mile or so, I drove with one wheel in the ditch just to avoid the deep ruts. The trees on either side were so thick and close, it felt like they were swallowing the light. But when I reached the cabin, it was exactly as described. Small but clean. A single room with a bed, a fireplace, a little table, a kitchenette, and a tiny bathroom off to the side with just a compost toilet and a metal basin for washing up. I unpacked my groceries, lit a fire, and settled in. Later that night, after I made some dinner and sat down with a book, I noticed a notebook sitting on the mantel above the fireplace. It had guest log written on the front in black marker. I've always loved reading those things. They're usually filled with silly little notes. Someone's kid writing about catching frogs, couples leaving mushy messages, stuff like that. I flipped it open. The first few pages were exactly what I expected. One family had written about how peaceful the place was. Another entry mentioned the trail down to the lake and recommended going early in the morning to see deer. Someone had drawn a rough map showing where to find wild blueberries. A guy wrote about how his dog wouldn't stop barking at the trees but chalked it up to squirrels. All normal stuff, but then I got to an entry dated just a month before I arrived. The handwriting changed. It looked rushed, the ink a little smeared like the person had written it fast, maybe with a shaky hand. It read, "There's someone living in the woods. Don't ignore the noises. Don't go outside if you hear knocking." I paused. Read it again. It gave me a weird feeling, but I figured maybe it was a joke. Some people like leaving fake spooky messages to mess with whoever reads it next. Still, it didn't feel like a joke. I turned the page. "He comes closer each night. Last night he stood on the roof." The writing on this one looked messier, more uneven. It looked like the pen had dug deep into the paper in places, like they were pressing hard. The words weren't centered either, like they just scrawled it in the middle of the page in a rush. I turned another page. "If you're reading this, leave now." That was the last thing written. The next 30 or so pages were blank. Nothing else. I stared at that for a while, trying to decide how I felt about it. I told myself it was probably just someone trying to leave behind a creepy little story, like a cabin version of telling ghost stories around a fire. I put the notebook back and tried to forget about it. The first night passed quietly, cold but quiet. The wind rattled the trees a bit, but that was it. I slept okay. The second day I went down to the lake, took some photos, sat on a log for an hour and just listened to the water. When I came back, I gathered some kindling for the fire and made dinner. The sky turned orange early. The trees cast these long, slow-moving shadows that stretched over the clearing and across the cabin. I thought about the notebook again as the sun went down. The woods really were quiet. Not completely silent, but quiet in a way you only hear far away from people. No traffic, no planes, no voices, just the wind and an occasional creak from the trees. It should have been peaceful, but that line about someone standing on the roof, it stuck with me. That night, I went to bed around 11. I left the fire burning low. I didn't lock the cabin door. The listing had said the lock was just decorative, and it was the kind you could pop open with a screwdriver anyway. Still, I slid a heavy chair in front of it, more for peace of mind than anything else. I woke up at 3:17 a.m. I remember because I checked the time on my watch. I hadn't heard anything in my sleep, but I was suddenly wide awake. Something felt off. I listened. Then it came. A knock. 3 slow knocks. Not hard, not frantic, just deliberate. I didn't move. I stayed in bed under the covers, holding my breath. Another knock, then silence. No footsteps, no voice, just quiet again. I waited for maybe 20 minutes without moving. I didn't even sit up. I just stared at the dark ceiling and listened. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep again, because the next thing I remember was light pouring in through the small window above the bed. Morning. I got up, heart still beating a little too fast, and checked outside. There were no footprints on the soft ground out front. The forest was quiet. I told myself maybe it had been a branch, falling pine cone, but I knew it wasn't. I went back inside and packed up my stuff. I ate a granola bar while I shoved my clothes into my bag. I didn't even make coffee. I just wanted to be gone. Before I left, I looked at the guest log one last time. I don't know why. Maybe I thought there'd be another message I had missed, or maybe I wanted to see if the entries before that creepy one felt any different now. But no, it was the same. Happy notes, then that warning, then nothing. I didn't write anything in the book. I thought about it, but I figured it wouldn't make a difference. Who would believe me? I didn't see anything. There was nothing to prove. Just a knock at 3:17 in the morning, and a feeling I still can't explain. I got in my car and drove out. The road felt even narrower going back, and the woods on either side seemed darker even in daylight. I didn't stop until I hit the main highway, and when I did, I pulled over and just sat there for a few minutes with the engine running, trying to settle myself. I never told the owners. I didn't leave a review. I never reported anything. But I think about that notebook a lot, how the rest of the pages were blank, how it ended with, "If you're reading this, leave." I just hope no one ignores it. I hope the next person who opens that notebook reads it before the second night, before the knock, before it gets closer. I rented a small off-grid cabin in northern Michigan for a quiet break. Work had been nonstop for months, and I needed time to reset. No phone service, no Wi-Fi, no neighbors. Just me, some books, a fishing rod, and the quiet that only deep woods could give. The cabin was an hour from the nearest gas station, another 15 minutes down a narrow dirt road. Surrounded by dense trees, it looked like something out of an old postcard, small. Weathered wood, a metal chimney, and a tiny porch with a rocking chair. Inside, it was basic but cozy. One bedroom, a bathroom with a composting toilet, and a combined kitchen living room with a wood stove. No TV, no microwave, just the basics. I brought enough food and water for the week. Everything was powered by a small solar panel setup. There was a propane tank for the stove and heater, and a few lanterns for nighttime. It was exactly what I needed. The silence out there was unbelievable. No cars, no planes overhead. Just wind in the trees and the occasional rustle of wildlife. The first 2 days were perfect. I read, made simple meals, hiked the nearby trails, and sat by the fire at night with a blanket and a mug of coffee. I slept deeply, uninterrupted. The bed was creaky but comfortable. I kept the windows open a little to let in the cool forest air. On the third night, something changed. I was brushing my teeth in the bathroom when I noticed a draft. The hallway felt colder than the rest of the cabin. I stepped out and saw the trapdoor in the hallway floor was wide open. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at it. It led to a crawl space maybe 4 feet high. I hadn't opened it. In fact, I hadn't even noticed it before. There was no wind that strong inside the cabin. No way it could have popped open on its own. Still, I told myself it might have been loose. Maybe the wood warped. I walked over and shut it. Felt heavy, solid. I had to use both hands to pull it closed. It made a loud thud when it dropped back into place. I made sure it was shut tight and went to bed. I didn't sleep well that night. Every noise felt louder. The creaking of the cabin settling made me sit up more than once. The next morning, I walked out of my room and froze. The trapdoor was open again. Wide open. I walked over and just stared into the black space below. The air coming from the opening was cool, damp, and smelled faintly of dirt and something else. Something sour. I shut it again, this time pressing down harder, even moving a heavy box of kindling over it. The rest of the day, I tried to keep myself distracted. I went fishing, walked further than usual, even chopped extra firewood. But every time I glanced toward the hallway, I felt my stomach tighten. I avoided that side of the cabin until I had to go to bed. That night, I locked my bedroom door for the first time. On the 4th morning, I woke up exhausted. I barely slept. Every creak of the cabin made me jump. I kept imagining footsteps just outside my door. When I finally worked up the nerve to open it, the trapdoor was open again, and the kindling box had been moved off to the side, as if carefully set down. It hadn't just slid on its own. I stood there for a long time trying to make sense of it. I felt dizzy. I packed some of my things and put them in the car, just in case. But I didn't leave. I told myself I was being paranoid. that it was probably some animal somehow getting in. Maybe a raccoon. I checked the crawl space entrance from outside the cabin. No obvious holes, no signs of digging or disturbed ground. Still, I wasn't thinking clearly. I stayed. That night, I locked the bedroom door again and set up my phone just outside it, pointing down the hallway toward the trapdoor. I set it to record and plugged it into the portable power bank so it wouldn't die. I didn't expect it to capture anything. It just made me feel better. I barely slept. I laid awake listening to the wind through the trees, trying to hear over the thump of my own heartbeat in my ears. The cabin felt wrong, like the silence was too heavy. When the first light of morning came through the window, I got up immediately and grabbed my phone. I went outside, sat in my car, and watched the footage. The trapdoor opened at 3:41 a.m., slowly, quietly, like someone had practiced. The camera didn't pick up sound, but I could almost hear the creak of the hinges in my head. Then a hand came up, pale, dirty fingers gripping the edge of the door. A man pulled himself out. He was thin, barefoot, wearing what looked like dark sweatpants and a torn shirt. His skin looked like it hadn't seen sunlight in a long time. His eyes were wide, too wide, like he was straining to see in the dim light from the hallway lantern. He stood up, hunched a little, then turned toward my bedroom door, and just stood there, not moving, not knocking, not trying to open it, just standing there. His hands hung at his sides, his head tilted slightly, like he was listening. He didn't move for over 40 minutes. Then, just as slowly, he crouched down, slid the trapdoor open again, and disappeared into the crawl space. The door shut behind him. I don't think I blinked the entire time I watched the video. My mouth was dry, my hands shaking. I didn't go back inside. I started the car and drove. No breakfast, no packing the rest of my things. Just drove. It was a long, silent 8-hour drive home. I didn't stop until I was back in my driveway. Then I just sat in the car, trying to breathe normally. I reported everything. The police went out there. I gave them the footage. They called me 2 days later to tell me the crawl space was empty. No signs anyone had been living there. No food, no bedding, no trash, no fingerprints. Nothing. But they said they weren't dismissing what I saw. The footage was too clear. The man was real. Whoever he was gone by the time they got there. The cabin was condemned and boarded up not long after. I haven't gone back to any cabin since. I haven't gone camping. I don't even go into basements anymore. And I still lock my bedroom door every night. I still check under the bed. And I always make sure there's nothing on the floor that could be moved. Nothing that could be placed back carefully where I left it. Because something about that man, the way he stood there, the way he waited, told me it wasn't the first time he'd done that. Felt like routine to him, like he knew the cabin well, like he'd lived there long before I showed up, maybe even while others stayed there too. And now, no matter how many nights I go without anything strange happening, I can't shake the feeling that someone might be just on the other side of the wall, listening, waiting for me to sleep. My buddy and I went up to his grandfather's cabin in rural Colorado in early October. The trees were already starting to thin out, the leaves crunchy and dry, the air colder than it should have been for fall. He told me his grandfather hadn't been up there in years. The place didn't have electricity, no running water, and definitely no cell service. It was about 3 hours from the nearest real town, and the last 30 minutes were on dirt roads that looked like they hadn't been driven on all year. We had to stop twice to clear fallen branches. The cabin itself looked like it had been forgotten. A low, dark structure with a tin roof, moss creeping up the sides, and the faint smell of rot coming from the front porch. Inside was all wood, creaky floorboards, dusty furniture, a stone fireplace with ashes from who knows when. We brought our own food, sleeping bags, a small gas-powered generator, and 2 lanterns. The place had a strange stillness to it. No bugs, no birds, just wind. That first night, we set up the lanterns in the main room and got the generator running for a bit to heat up some food. It made the whole cabin shake a little. We talked for a while, then shut everything off and went to bed early. We were sleeping in separate rooms, and even with my door closed, I could hear every single creak in the walls. I didn't sleep much. The cold came up through the floorboards, and the silence outside felt too thick, too hollow. The second night is when it happened. We'd spent most of the day hiking around the woods nearby, collecting firewood, trying to find where an old trail used to be, based on his grandfather's hand-drawn map. It was easy to get turned around out there. The trees all looked the same, and everything was so quiet it messed with your sense of direction. But we stayed within shouting distance of the cabin and eventually made our way back before it got dark. We ate canned soup by the fire and lit one of the lanterns again. It cast a soft yellow light against the wood walls, just enough to make the shadows move in the corners of the room. Around 10 p.m., we turned off the lantern, put a few logs in the fireplace, and called it a night. Maybe 20 minutes after we lay down, I noticed something. Through the crack in the curtain of my room, I saw a faint light flickering. At first, I thought it was the fire still burning out, but the light wasn't orange. It was pale, almost white, and it looked like it was coming from behind the trees. I got up and stepped into the main room. My buddy was already standing there, his face lit by the same soft glow coming in through the front window. We didn't say anything. We didn't have to. We both stepped outside. The air had dropped at least 10 degrees. You could see your breath. There was no wind, no sounds. Just that light, maybe 50 yards into the woods between the trees. It didn't move. It was steady, like it was coming from a window, even though we knew damn well there wasn't another cabin out there. His grandfather had always said this was the only structure in the area. The nearest neighbor lived miles down the ridge. We started walking toward it. I don't know why. Maybe curiosity. Maybe we just wanted to know if someone else was camping nearby or squatting. We didn't bring flashlights, just let our eyes adjust as we stepped over branches and dead leaves, the glow ahead of us pulling us forward. But the closer we got, the dimmer the light became. It wasn't sudden. It just slowly faded, like someone was turning a dimmer switch, until we were standing in complete darkness. Just trees. No structure. No fire. No light. We stood there for a long minute, breathing hard, trying to make sense of it. Then we turned around, and that's when we saw it. The same soft light, unmistakably the same color and shape, was now glowing from the front window of our cabin. The window we'd turned the lantern off behind. The window we had closed the curtains on before we left. It was like something had turned the lantern back on. We walked faster on the way back. Not running, but close. Neither of us said anything. Our boots crunched too loud on the leaves. The whole time I was thinking, maybe we forgot. Maybe one of us left it on. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. When we got back to the porch, everything looked untouched. Door still shut. No signs of anything forced open. We stepped inside. The front door creaked like always. The lantern was on, sitting in the exact center of the living room floor. Not on the table where we had left it. Not even near the fireplace where we used it. It was just sitting there on the wood floor, lit. Neither of us moved for a few seconds. Then we packed. We didn't even speak. Just started gathering everything, stuffing it into our bags, rolling up the sleeping bags without bothering to fold them. I shut off the lantern. We didn't even turn off the generator. We just left. Drove through the night, bouncing down the dirt road, headlights catching every branch like it might jump out at us. We got home around 4 a.m. A few days passed. We didn't talk about it much. Then, about a week later, my buddy called me. Said his grandfather had phoned him earlier that day. The man hadn't been up to the cabin in years, but he still got reports from a local who checked on it once in a while. That guy said he'd gone up there that morning and saw a light inside. Thought maybe someone had broken in, but the doors were locked, windows shut, and when he got inside, there was no one there. Just the lantern, sitting in the middle of the floor again, lit. After that, they boarded the place up. His grandfather didn't want anyone using it anymore. Didn't even try to sell it. Said it just wasn't worth the trouble. As far as I know, it's still there. Dark, locked, forgotten. And I've never gone back. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend. Nothing dramatic, just me, a couple books, some frozen meals, and a few beers. I'd been working long hours and needed a break. Not something expensive or fancy, just something out of the city. I found a small cabin listed on Airbnb. It was right by a lake in the woods, about a 2.5-hour drive from where I lived. The price was low, but not suspiciously low. The pictures showed a simple, one-bedroom wooden cabin with a little front porch, a dock leading into the lake, and a small kitchen and living space. A few decent reviews said it was peaceful and private. That's all I wanted. I booked it for the weekend, Friday to Sunday. The host messaged with the usual instructions. A lockbox would be mounted beside the front door. The code was provided. I packed my bags Friday morning and drove out right after lunch. The roads got narrower the farther I went. Eventually, I turned off the main highway onto a gravel road. There were no signs or houses for miles, just forest. When I finally saw the cabin, I actually smiled a little. It looked exactly like the pictures. Old, weathered wood, but clean and quiet. I parked on the small dirt driveway beside it, stepped out and stretched. Felt good. I could hear birds. The air smelled like pine and water. The lake was maybe 30 feet behind the cabin, still and dark and glassy. No boats, no people, no sounds except wind and insects. I found the lockbox, punched in the code, and the key came out smoothly. Everything seemed in order. Inside, it was about what I expected. Rustic but tidy. The furniture was old but clean. There was a single couch facing a wood-burning stove, a small TV mounted to the wall, a dining table for two, and a kitchenette with a small fridge and microwave. The bedroom had a basic bed with clean sheets, a small nightstand, and a single window that looked out toward the trees. The bathroom was small but usable. All in all, it felt fine. I unpacked, threw my bag in the bedroom, and opened a beer. I didn't do much that evening. Heated up a frozen lasagna, read a few chapters of a book, and sat on the porch for a while watching the lake. No cell service, but the Wi-Fi worked well enough to check some emails and stream a bit of music. I went to bed around 10, a little buzzed and content. No weird sounds, no animals scratching at the walls, just quiet. But then, around 11, something jolted me up. I was half asleep when bright light poured in through the cabin's front windows. I sat up, disoriented, and went to the living room. Headlights. A truck had pulled up right into the driveway. It just sat there, engine running. The beams lit up the entire front of the cabin. Then the door handle rattled. There was a loud, sharp knock. Then harder. I froze. Another bang. I stepped back from the door and stayed completely still. I don't know why, but I didn't speak. I just listened. More banging. Then I heard a man's voice, muffled but angry. He kept shouting, but I didn't respond. I didn't know what to do. My phone had no signal and the Wi-Fi wasn't working anymore. Maybe it had cut out, or maybe I'd accidentally unplugged the router when I set my bag down. Eventually, the man walked back to the truck. I peeked through the side of the window. He wasn't a cop. He looked like some regular guy in his 50s. He had a big frame, bald, wearing a dark jacket and jeans. He pulled something from the glove compartment and walked back toward the door. That's when I called 911 using Wi-Fi calling, which thankfully kicked back in. The dispatcher asked where I was, and I didn't even know how to explain it. I had to dig through my email to find the listing confirmation and give them coordinates. I stayed quiet the whole time. I didn't make a sound. The man didn't try to break in, but he stayed outside, walking around the cabin for a bit, then leaning against his truck. Eventually, after maybe 15 minutes, a sheriff's car pulled in. I watched through the curtain as the officers spoke with the man first. He was animated, pointing at the cabin, then pointing at me. One of the officers came to the door and knocked, softer this time. I opened it just a crack. They asked for ID and how I got there. I explained I booked the place through Airbnb. I showed them the listing, the messages, the payment confirmation, everything. They took my phone and started going through it while I stood on the porch. The man kept shaking his head. He told the officers he owned the cabin, had for 10 years, said he hadn't rented it out in over 2 years, and that the last time it was ever listed, it was on a different platform. He'd never used Airbnb. Eventually, the officers explained the situation to me. Apparently, someone had duplicated the old listing, used the same photos, copied the old description, and made a fake Airbnb account. The real owner had no idea. I'd been scammed, paid someone who didn't own the property. It wasn't even the first time something like this had happened. They said, some people make a quick buck by stealing old listings and relisting them under a new name. I was told I'd technically broken in, even though it wasn't my fault. The guy didn't press charges. He was mostly just pissed off and confused. The police had me gather my stuff. They stood by while I packed up and I left that night. But here's the part that still messes with my head. When I first arrived at the cabin earlier that afternoon, I noticed something weird. There were 2 wet footprints on the tile floor in the bathroom, right outside the shower. Not muddy, just wet, as if someone had stepped out with bare feet. I thought maybe the cleaning service had come through recently, but there was no mop streaks, no smell of cleaner, nothing fresh. Just 2 wet marks. No others, no drips, no towel moved. The rest of the bathroom was dry. At the time, I didn't think much of it. Maybe the owner had come up to check on the place and used the shower, I figured. Maybe it was just leftover moisture from the pipes or condensation. But now, I don't know. Whoever scammed me had to get in to take updated photos or to leave the key in the lockbox. There's no way the scam would have worked without someone having access. Maybe they broke in themselves and used the place for a night or 2, maybe more. Maybe I showed up just after they left. Or maybe they were still inside when I arrived and slipped out quietly. That cabin had a back door and a shed near the tree line. I never checked it. All I know is that the footprints weren't mine. I left that night and stayed in a cheap motel by the highway. Airbnb refunded me after a few days, and the fake listing was taken down. They apologized, but that doesn't mean much when you've spent a night in someone else's home unknowingly, not knowing who was there before or during you. It's been months, but I still think about it. I think about how close I was to something going wrong. That man outside was angry, sure, but imagine if he'd had a different reaction. Imagine if the scammer hadn't left. Imagine if they'd stayed hidden. I didn't hear anything weird that night, but cabins creak and shift, and I didn't know what to listen for. I think what unsettles me the most is how normal everything felt. Everything looked exactly right. The pictures matched. The lockbox worked. Nothing was broken or out of place, except those footprints. Whoever left them never dried the floor, and I still have no idea where they went. It started as a quiet trip. I'd taken a week off work, told a few friends I was going to disappear into the woods for a bit, and booked a remote cabin in Montana. I didn't want company. I didn't want my phone buzzing or emails piling up. I just wanted silence. Space. The kind of space where the only thing I'd hear would be the wind through trees or snow falling on the roof. No service. No Wi-Fi. Just isolation. The cabin was small, maybe 500 square feet. A single bedroom, a bathroom with a compost toilet, and a small living area with a fireplace, with stove for heat, propane for cooking. I brought books, a notepad, and enough food to last the whole week. The windows were old and the wind whistled through the frames at night, but it felt peaceful, real. The first day and night passed without anything unusual. I chopped wood, made a fire, cooked a simple dinner, and read until I fell asleep in the worn armchair. The quiet was deep, deeper than anything I'd felt in the city. It was like the world just paused. It snowed the second night. Thick, heavy snow. I opened the door in the morning to a white world. At least a foot had fallen. The trees looked like ghosts, weighed down and silent. There were no sounds, no birds, no animals, nothing. Just stillness. As I stepped outside to grab more firewood from the covered pile, I noticed something strange. Boot prints in the snow, leading up to my front porch. They weren't mine. I stood there for a few minutes, just staring at them. They came in from the side, curving from behind the cabin, up to the front door. I hadn't walked around that way. I had only gone back and forth to the outhouse and the firewood stack. And besides, my boots had a different tread. These were larger, deeper, like work boots but older. The edges of the prints were clean, meaning they were fresh. Sometime last night, maybe early morning. What unsettled me more was that there were no prints going away. Just one clear trail leading up to my door, and then nothing. No exit, no circling around, no returning prints, just a clean stop at the porch. I looked around, half expecting someone to be watching me from the trees, but there was nothing, just the still, cold forest. I backed into the cabin and locked the door, double-checked the windows. Every one of them was shut tight. I even climbed up the narrow hallway ladder to check the attic space. Nothing there. No signs of anyone. I tried to tell myself I'd made the prints somehow, maybe walked out while sleepwalking. But I'd never done anything like that before. And again, they weren't the same boots. Mine were smaller, lighter. These were heavy with a defined heel. The rest of the day, I couldn't relax. I kept peeking through the curtains, checking the tree lean, recounting the footprints. They stayed the same. Still just the one trail. Still ending at the porch. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the old couch with my flashlight in one hand and a kitchen knife in the other. I felt stupid at first, like I was acting paranoid. But the longer the night dragged on, the more that feeling sank into my gut. A slow, cold weight. I kept staring at the door, watching the doorknob. The fire burned low and I let it. I wanted it quiet. At 3:12 a.m., I heard it. A soft, short sound. The doorknob jiggled. Not a knock, not banging, just a gentle twist like someone testing it. It happened once, then again. My heart jumped so hard I thought I might throw up. I stood slowly and aimed the flashlight at the door, my hand shaking. The third time the knob moved, I ran at it, flinging the door open, yelling something. I don't even remember what, probably just noise. But no one was there. The snow looked untouched, except the footprints, the same ones from before, and now a second pair next to them. 2 sets of boot prints, side by side, both ending at the porch. Still no prints walking away. I scanned the trees with the flashlight. Nothing. No shadows, no movement. I stepped out just far enough to check around the edges of the cabin. No marks on the sides, no ladder, no broken windows. The second pair of prints hadn't been there earlier. That much I was sure of. They were fresh, sharper than the others. I didn't sleep. I sat in the corner of the cabin, facing the door, flashlight on my lap, knife in my hand, fire out. I kept listening for footsteps, but heard nothing. By morning, my nerves were wrecked. I barely felt human. My hands were numb, my legs stiff, my mouth dry. I opened the door again. The prints were still there. No changes. No signs of anyone coming or going. I didn't even see animal tracks anywhere around the cabin. Just snow and trees and cold. I wanted to leave, but the road I came in on was narrow, winding, and now covered in over a foot of snow. My car was a 2-wheel drive rental. I doubted it would make it back up the hill, especially with how much more snow was coming. So I stayed. The next day, I tried to stay busy. I cleaned up the cabin, made a new pile of chopped wood, kept the fire going hot. Anything to stop myself from thinking. But by nightfall, my stomach was in knots again. I tried to eat but couldn't finish a can of soup. I was exhausted, but couldn't lie down. Not with the door so close to the couch. I took the knife again and kept it under my blanket. I left the flashlight on. It didn't help. 3:18 a.m., I heard it again. The knob, just once this time. Faint twist. I sat frozen. Then soft footsteps on the porch. Just a couple. Slow. I didn't yell. I didn't run to the door. I just sat there listening. After maybe a minute, I stood, still holding the knife, and crept to the door. I waited another minute before swinging it open as fast as I could. Nothing. No one. But now there were 3 sets of prints. 3. Still no trail leaving. I wanted to scream. My mouth was open, but no sound came. I turned and backed into the cabin, locked the door, pushed the small couch against it, then shoved the armchair behind that. I stacked firewood under the windows and tried to make it harder to get in. I didn't sleep at all that night. I just watched the walls, waiting for a sound. Morning came like a joke, bright and quiet. I pulled the furniture back and opened the door again. Same 3 pairs of boots, all pointed toward the cabin. Still no prints going away. I packed my stuff in 5 minutes. I didn't even clean up. Just grabbed everything I'd brought and shoved it in my bag. I didn't eat. I didn't look around. The snow was deep, but I forced the car down the slope, wheels spinning half the way, fishtailing near the curve. I didn't care if I wrecked it. I just needed to leave. I reached the highway just before noon and didn't stop until I hit a gas station with cell signal. I sat in the parking lot for half an hour before I could even speak to the guy behind the counter. I told him someone had been on the property at night, that they kept coming back. He looked at me for a long time and then said, "Yeah, that happens sometimes out there." That was all. I drove straight home. I never went back, never followed up with the rental owner. I didn't leave a review. To this day, I don't know who was out there, or how they came and went without leaving tracks, or why they didn't try to get in. They just watched, and that was enough.